Well, we're very grateful that everybody's listening and watching this podcast right now. But what in the hell are you doing? You should be reading or listening to American Kings, a biography of the quarterback, the best sports book that you'll read this year. You know, Ray Thompson, when he puts that out there, I saw that when I was reading some reviews ahead of time, and Ray Thompson is a legend and a good friend of yours, but when he is kind of putting his name to a declaration like that, you know that this book is going to deliver, and it exceeded my wildest expectations. Full disclosure, I'm not all the way through it, but I don't know, maybe about halfway. It's amazing, Seth, and we are honored to have you here on the podcast. So thanks so much for taking some time.
Good to see you, my man.
And I mean, I think, God, we've known each other for a while, but I've always just looked up
Mhm.
to you. There are
Oh,
a very, maybe you can count on one hand the number of people who cover pro football who really genuinely just take you places beyond what's out
mm,
there, beyond the mainstream, beyond the press conference. And I'm just blown away by the access that you're able to get. So I know whatever topic you take on, whether it's a story on the Cleveland Browns way back when,
mm,
that was like what 6 7 years ago at this point. I just
yeah.
remember when that dropped. I remember being at a bar working on a story at Bleach Report, and just like Seth writes something, you drop what you're doing and you read it. I don't care what you're doing,
Oh,
and you just make sure you read it in that moment because it is guaranteed to make some news. But I have a million
thank
questions.
you. Sure.
First of all, how in the hell are you?
I'm great. I mean, if you want to just keep talking about, how great you think I am, just keep going. I can not talk this entire episode if you want. No, but I appreciate it. And, look, um, I think that like one of the interesting things about being in this job is that you get, if you're lucky, you get to do it at different stages, right? You get to do it at like the up and coming stage. And then at the stage where you've kind of arrived a little bit. And then at the stage, if you're lucky, where you're doing some serious stuff that maybe hasn't been done before. And then you get to see others take that and move it to in the directions that they want and elevate it. And like, so that's been really cool watching because, I think that like, I think the exact same thing of you. And that's that like, when you do one of your deep dives, regardless of forum or platform, it's one of those things you just simply have to pay attention to. And it's been fun watching you, you know, develop a niche of your own and then elevate that niche to something that's pretty freaking cool.
Oh man, thanks for that, Seth. That means the world. Like, you know, I wrote my first book in 2021. I forget who told me this, but shit, it might have been you. You might have told me this. Now that I think about it, like
That
I think
writing a
you
book
told
sucks
me
and never do it again.
it was yeah something like that. You're like, God, this I think this was you, Seth. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you told me like if you're gonna write a book, you better be passionate about it because it's
Yeah.
gonna be at the forefront of your brain. Like every day, you're gonna be thinking about it.
Hmm.
You're gonna be thinking about the interview you just had, the interview that you have scheduled, how one
Yeah.
anecdote is going to weave into the next, um, deadlines. It's just naturally
Well,
that's
yeah,
the nature of the
yeah.
beast. You're going to be you have to be obsessed with it. So like how did you take this project on? Because it sounds like an intimidating project, like the biography of the quarterback.
Yeah.
But where did it really start? Like what first piqued your interest when you thought about this as a topic?
Well, um, I think to do a book, a couple things you have to kind of delusionally believe. You have to believe that the book has to be out there, that it hasn't been done. Even if in some cases, like with my Patriots book, I mean, people had written books about the Patriots, but then you have to believe I'm the one who I'm the only one who can do this. Whether that's true or not, you kind of have to believe it, and then um, you have to want to do it every day because you have to have that emotional tailwind at your back. And I think that with the quarterback book, with the Patriots book, the publisher came to me. So, I had someone who wanted me to do it, and so I was like, okay, I can do this. With the quarterback book, it was so different because um, I had to do it. I had to get it out there. And I think that like, I've been trying to not sound like the Alaska Uncle Rico here, but I was a quarterback in high school. And, I have some scars from the experience. And, I wasn't writing a book about my morass as a quarterback, but thematically, I wanted to write a book about what this job is like from sunrise to sunset. And because it's a very unique job. And I think that like when you zoom out, you're like, what the hell are we doing? Like, you're not just signing up to throw a football, you're signing up to do all these things. Like Steve Young and I were talking, and I said, if you're the starting quarterback of a professional football team, how many hats do you have to wear? And he just starts rattling them off. Field general, matinee idol, spokesperson for a multi-billion-dollar organization, amateur psychologist, devastating asshole, all these things. And then he got to like 17, and then later on, he kept adding to it. And so then I saw that like, youth quarterbacking has just exploded. And so we're ascribing these responsibilities to a younger and younger and younger group of people. And so I just knew that like the job does something to people. I knew from my little experience and the way that it took over my identity in high school that it does something to people. And so I really wanted to capture it from the beginning when you first pick up a football to retired Hall of Famer to even death, now and throughout history. So those are the things I was trying to do in an insane way.
Yeah.
I was trying to tell the story of every quarterback through the handful of characters that I picked.
I'm so glad that you narrated your own book too, because it has that personal touch. And I,
Mm,
I love how you started it. Look, yeah, you know what? We can sound like a couple of Uncle Ricos here, but it's true. Like we're writing about
yeah.
football because we played football, the sport and specifically that position, it just had such an effect on us. In
Hmm.
countless ways. I just know I'm not the person I am without playing the sport, playing the position. There's something that goes into it, the ups, the downs, the trials, the tribulations. Like, God, I just remember like holding that ball like junior year when I was the starting quarterback, and we had this
Yeah.
play, the 22 jet pass, where it's like we ran the ball a ton, but we'd pull the safety up, and a coach in the box would see it, and then I would just do a little play action fake and chuck it deep to Kyle Mendel, our receiver. And like the
Yeah.
scrimmage we had that year, I threw like 7, 8 touchdowns. There's no pressure.
Yeah.
It's like this is gonna work. All the confidence in the world. And the first game, we're playing a bad team, Climber, and we called it. And the guy, he's wide open. I see he's wide open, but I hang on to it. Nerves take over, and I get sacked. And I still remember our coach reaming my ass out. Throw it, Tyler. Throw it. He called it again like two plays
Yeah.
later. Just stand there, release it, like let go. It's such a life lesson. Like, don't be afraid. Be fearless.
Yeah.
You see it, believe it, throw it. And then things went great from that on out. And the way you start this book, like, man, I could just feel your passion for the position. And I'll let you kind of take over here. But what happens, Seth, when you've got these dreams of becoming a high school quarterback star out there in
Yeah.
Alaska, and it doesn't
Yeah.
go according to plan?
Well, yeah, I mean, the dreams ended. And I mean, I think that like, at the end of the day, I think that my skill set as a quarterback could have continued a little bit, but not too much further because, I think that like you can't have to ever think about throwing. Like I think it has to come so naturally to you that you never really have to think about it. And even though I was a decent quarterback, I did have to think about it. And when I got moved to receiver, receiver catching the ball was something I never put pressure on myself to do it. I never to think about it. I always just did it. And I always think back on that like that's the entry point. Like you can't have to think about throwing, but that's not how it works because as I show in the book, it's like you do have to think about it at some point. And this job is so interesting and unique. Um, and it's so affecting and so whether you're John Elway or Warren Moon or whoever it might be, your guest last week, it affects you in so many deep and profound ways. And, that's what I had to try to explore in the book without, holding back. And I really felt like I had to like explain it warts and all and, get into issues Warren Moon has allegedly had with women, or getting into drinking issues with John Elway, or one of my characters is a high school kid who ends up in the ICU. Um, just talking about what this stage does, what this platform does to these people, and then what they're able to do with it. Those are the things that I really wanted to explore. And, hopefully I did a decent job. But yeah, someone, I think it was the New Yorker who wrote, Seth knows what it's like to walk through the hallways in high school as a quarterback, and knows what it's like to walk through the hallways not. And I was like,
Yeah.
yep, yes, I do. And
And
the
it's
gap in between those things is what the book's about.
and I think I texted you. I probably texted you while I was driving. So sorry, hon, if you're listening to this
Oh,
podcast. She doesn't listen to the podcast, my wife, but like it just you brought back the PTSD, man. Like throwing
yeah, sorry
an
about that.
awful interception in regionals at the one
Yeah,
yard line. Delaware right,
yeah,
two pop, two pass. I didn't think, just threw it. They saw the film step, but it's like
yeah.
those bad moments, I think, stick with
Hmm.
quarterbacks even more than the good moments, whether it's just a couple of high schoolers like us, like you still think about. I love
Hmm.
how you wrote it. Like you could have walked one direction on the practice field or the other,
Yeah,
and you walked
yeah,
the other. And
yeah,
I don't know. To this day, I'll have nightmares thinking about that throw. Like
yeah.
you
No,
probably think about that practice to this day.
it's scar. Yeah, I mean, and yeah, it scars you, and you'll see at the end. There's a little bit of me returning to the stage as a quarterback with a little twist. So enjoy
Ooh.
that.
And the way that you structured the book, I guess we don't
Yeah.
have to get too granular with it, but it's fascinating because you easily could have just like chapter one, Walter
Hmm.
Camp, go back to when football players are literally killing themselves on a field,
Yeah.
and so the forward pass is invented and saves the
Hmm.
sport, and you could have gone to Bob Water, but what was your process and how you structured American Kings? Because I love it. I mean, you're able to
Yeah.
gracefully pivot from like one era to the next, so Elway to Moon to
Thank
Young
you.
to Waterfield to the high school
Yeah.
quarterback that you mentioned. It's because I think as a feature writer, that's always a struggle. You don't want to just plot along and just go A to B to C to D because that's the inclination. But you figured out a way to write this story beautifully by just blending all of these different generations and all of these different
Well,
themes.
what I wanted to do was, so when I researched the history of the quarterback, not the history of the forward pass, but the history of the quarterback, one of the things that truly surprised me was how quick the job of quarterback throwing the ball became celebrated and mythologized in our culture. And there's a couple college players especially who were really responsible for that aren't household names, like Bo McMillan, who was retroactively awarded the Heisman for the 1921 season. There's a lot of people like that. And so um, since from the moment the spiral kind of entered the lexicon, this job has been celebrated. I knew as a storyteller that aspects of people's stories were going to talk to each other. So like I knew that like there's aspects of Bob Waterfield's and Bob Waterfield was a phenomenal quarterback in the 1940s. He's one of the most important quarterbacks ever for one of the most important teams ever that I get into in the book. But like um I knew that there was elements of his story that would speak to John Elway's story, that would speak to Arch Manning's story, whatever those things are. And so I didn't do chapters. I needed the story for the stories to be able to speak to each other. I had to figure out a way for them to intersect. And so I didn't want to do a chapter about Bob Waterfield because then it's limited to that part of the book. Whereas like if I sprinkle Bob Waterfield's story throughout the book, when you see his rise and his fame and his marriage and all of these things that contributed to him being a very important cultural figure. And then you see him later in life where, there's a ton of drinking and divorce and adultery and fighting and all this stuff. You see that talk to other people throughout history. And so that's why I structured it as I did, was because I just wanted John Elway's story to talk to Steve Young's, to talk to Caleb Williams's, to talk to Arch Manning's, that type of thing.
What were those iconic moments then when the quarterback position became larger
Well,
than
in
life? Like where would
1906,
you even start?
in 1906, it was interesting. It was actually close to where I live here in Connecticut. But in 1906, the forward pass was legalized. So, all of these coaches sprinkled throughout the country are deploying it as they can. And it wasn't really emphasized, but you could use it. And Wesleyan University played at Yale. And Wesleyan was led by this coach who was like the Kyle Shanahan of his era. It's ridiculous, but he calls this play with like two receivers running deep crossers as decoys, and then a tailback coming underneath as I was like, man, that's not bad for 1906, and uh, and so the quarterback Sam Moore threw this pass to the tailback for 18 yards, and the crowd at Yale was like so stunned by what they had seen that at first it was quiet, and then they
Yeah.
like gave the guy a standing ovation.
I
And
love
then
that part
sure
of the
enough,
book.
like Bo McMillan later for Centre College in Kentucky pulls out this great upset over Harvard. New York Times called it the biggest upset in college football in the first half of the century. He goes back to Kentucky. They throw a parade for him, and the governor is like, I would do anything to trade places with you. And so you see these moments where just this ability to throw a spiral is getting elevated and mythologized and celebrated at the highest levels of the kind of social status that we have. And so that has only taken off to the end. And then you have different people who helped it from there, like Bob Waterfield, one of the first part of one half of one of the first celebrity couples, power couples, with Jane Russell in the
Mm-hmm.
40s, and all of the joy and pain that brought. You have Johnny Unitas entering the picture, and you have Joe Namath, obviously, like, one of the most important American men of this century, really, because, like Mick Jagger and like others, he showed young men what doing something this particular job can the life it can bring for you. And so anyway, those are the moments. And then when you see those blocks built, you see why John Elway was famous and nationally as a high school kid in 1977, and why um Warren Moon became the highest paid player in the NFL in 1984, and all of these things that happen along the line that I think help you understand the allure of it today, and why the high school quarterback circuit is this multi-million dollar enterprise.
I didn't really realize too how at risk the sport itself was when people are dying, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Before the ball is being thrown in the air. Take us back to that
Mm-hmm.
time. I mean, how close was football to just vanishing and
Well,
disappearing,
it's hard to
being
say, but
outlawed?
like, yeah, it was hard to say, but it's like it was in peril. And you have Teddy Roosevelt getting involved, and you have the Ford. It's interesting because we think about the quarterback as we celebrate it is this guy who can solve all these problems, right? They can at their best they can erase certain problems and create magic out of other ones. And you know, at a very basic level, the quarterback was invented to save lives, which is kind of hilarious and funny. But it was the quarterback started as two words, quarterback, when Walter Camp invented it in 1880. And then, as the forward pass is legalized, I define it according to the Webster's dictionary throughout history. It was one of the cool things that I tried to do was show how the definition of the job had evolved as a real way of showing like how its place in society had changed. And um, you know, it was quarterback two words, and then it was quarterback with a hyphen, and then by the 30s, really in the 20s, you see it as one word. And at that point, the horses were out of the gate, and it's being used as an adverb, as an adjective. It's like all of these things beyond just being a noun.
I had no clue the significance that Bob Waterfield really had on the position,
Mm-hmm.
on the sport. To me, it was just a name lost in time. And if like working on Blood and Guts and
Yeah.
trying to learn more about pro football has taught me anything, I've gained such a respect for past eras. Like I always cringe when those
Yeah.
top 10 shows come on NFL Network because
Yeah.
on one of them I'm just like I had hair, just snot nosed, like beat writer probably at the Journal Sentinel one time.
Uh-huh.
Maybe I was at Bleacher Report, but I'm like making fun of quarterbacks in the 50s, saying what are these guys
Yeah.
are doing in the 50s? They're making shoes in the off season or baking,
Yeah.
this. But man, the more you read about football in the 60s and the 50s, even into the 40s, like you gain such a respect for those players and those eras. But what did Bob Waterfield really mean
Well,
for the quarterback
culturally,
position?
yeah, culturally, he was interesting because he married Jane Russell, who was, the country's biggest pinup star of the 40s. And when the Rams moved to LA, they started in Cleveland. He played his rookie year in Cleveland. They won a championship, which is, he won MVP, Rookie of the Year, and a World Championship. They moved the team to Cleveland 3 weeks later, or to LA 3 weeks later. And they partly because of their star power and her star power, and because the owner, Dan Reeves, saw this opportunity. And so you have the golden age of Hollywood and the beginning of the NFL, and you have these two American entertainment forces colliding like at their house. And the parties that they threw, marrying, movie stars and football players, were just amazing. And I know that we've had famous college quarterbacks, from Tim Tebow to Caleb Williams, but like, I mean, the people that Bob Waterfield was hanging out with as a student at UCLA, the Sinatras, I mean, he eclipses all of them. And so he put quarterback into these elite social circles in an interesting way. And then I think that, like, he when the Rams moved to LA, it was a fascinating moment for the quarterback because out in LA, he becomes the archetype of the celebrity that like Joe Namath takes to the nth degree. Back in Cleveland, there's a void, and the NFL needs a team there, and so they fill it with the Cleveland Browns, led by Paul Brown, who essentially created an entire ethos and philosophy based on marginalizing the quarterback and empowering the coach. And so the two tensions that you see play out between the star quarterback and how much credit the quarterback deserves, and the all powerful head coach and how much power and credit the coach deserves, that has really defined every dynasty from the Browns to the Steelers to the 49ers and even the Patriots. Really began with that move. And so that I thought it was like some of the most important stuff that happened to the idea and the job of quarterback happened with Bob Waterfield and the Rams moving from Cleveland to LA.
So like Waterfield to Namath, Unitas,
Mm-hmm.
Moon, Young, all these quarterbacks
Mm-hmm.
that you really got to know better than anybody. What are those common personality traits that are in these guys that kind of gravitate them toward wanting the ball in their hands with everything on the line?
It's a fascinating thing because I think that it goes beyond, I think that the what you see with a relief pitcher or, you know, a star basketball player who kind of wants the ball in his hands in the critical moments. I think that, like, because we don't expect the same things out of a point guard as we do a quarterback. It's really it's and the celebrity is different. And so I think that, like, whether quarterback finds you or you find yourself in quarterback, I think that you have to have that hole in your personality that requires constant love and adulation and attention and nurturing. And really, you have to be a little isolated, I think, from teammates in reality, which I think is really a fascinating dynamic. I think that, like, in your reporting on Caleb Williams, you showed that. You know what I mean? You showed, like, here's a guy who comes in and he's like kind of on another planet. And I think that, like, that idea is really common among these guys because they have to figure out a way to kind of be part of the team, but really
Yeah.
believe deep down inside that they are kind of a superior being to all of their teammates and to all of their coaches, because there's so much pressure on this position that they kind of have to go there. They have to believe that. And that's a dangerous place. Andrew Luck did it, and he didn't like who he was, in that job, and that's one of the reasons why he walked away from it. It's because like he saw who he had to be a quarterback, and he didn't like it. And um, other guys are willing to kind of indulge that dark side of their personality, and it becomes really difficult to deal with when you're in retirement and away from the game.
Man, that's such a good point because I just think of Josh Allen here in Buffalo,
Mm-hmm.
and when I did that series on the Bills a couple years
Mm-hmm.
ago, there were teammates of Josh's who love him. I mean, they'd run through a wall for him. They
Yeah.
love the fact that he is one of them, like genuinely one of
Mm-hmm.
53, making the dick jokes in the locker room, wanting to run through your
Yeah.
face, just goes out there. I mean, you won't see him ever yell at a teammate, ever show up
Mm-hmm.
anybody between plays, like we might have saw
Yeah.
out of a Steelers quarterback last night. Like none of that's in Josh, but even some of the teammates who are extremely close to Josh Allen said then that they kind of wish that he had a little bit of what you're saying. So if something's going wrong, he could ball up that fist, go into a coach's office, and demand something to change. He just doesn't have that. He's the son of a farmer, right? Nobody wanted him. He had to go the JUCO route and then Wyoming, and he's
Yeah.
forever that no star kid who was overlooked, who isn't gonna go to that dark side. I mean, from what I can
Yeah.
tell, am I reporting that's just
Well,
not in him? I guess you got to have some of that probably to an extent.
well,
Maybe he's getting it.
you do, and it's like one of the most interesting things that happened with like Johnny Unitas and Y.A. Tittle and Steve Young, and it's happened since then, is that like teammates truly didn't accept these guys until they told the coach to go fuck himself. And Steve Young like grinded away for years. He couldn't sleep. He was so anxious and insecure and stressed about what it was like replacing Joe Montana and winning MVP awards and it being a huge disappointment, right? And it was in the 1994 season that they were losing to the Philadelphia Eagles and they were getting blown out and he got pulled and they only pulled him out of all the starters and he just lost his shit and he starts screaming at George Seifert on the sideline and he wanted to fight him. He wanted to go. And even after the game, he was still trying to fight him.
Oh.
Anyway, he shows up for work the next day and it's like the teammates all of a sudden look at him like, you're our guy now. And he was accepted in a way that all of his grinding and great performances and awards and all of these things he had done hadn't produced for some reason. And like he was like, God, if I had only known that all I had to do was yell at the coach, I would have done it years earlier. But it's just one of those weird things where it's like, um, how you're perceived and again, quarterback is one job out of 11 on the football field, but it's a really, really vital one. And because of that, at some point they have to take ownership um, of the team, basically. You know what I mean? And have to just say, I don't care what anybody else has to say. I know better. And this is what makes me special. And this is why, you know, I'm Aaron Rodgers and you're not.
Because it's going to be the fourth quarter, the ball's going to be in your hands, and you're going to have to rise up, take
Yeah.
over at some
Yeah.
point. You can't be just one of 11, right? Whatever
No, you
cliche you
can't.
want to use. You're not.
Yeah.
Which quarterback did you enjoy sitting down with the most?
I like them all in different ways. So out of all the characters, it's like I used Arch Manning and Arch's recruitment as a way to kind of get at the Mannings and try to explain and take you underneath the hood a little bit of this iconic football family. Elway was my personal hero growing up, and he was also the first one who was number one out of high school, number one out of, first pick in the draft, first ballot Hall of Famer. So I knew that to survive that, he had to have hardwired himself in a particular way that I really wanted to explore and that had some dark side to it. Um, I really enjoyed getting to know Caleb and his dad because I had three bars for characters. Number one, they either had to be so culturally big that you couldn't write about quarterbacks without writing about them, i.e., Joe Namath, or they'd have a story that I was just fascinated with. Steve Young, Warren Moon, that type of thing, or John Elway, or they had to be in a situation I was fascinated with, even if they themselves I wasn't like particularly fascinated with. And that's where Colin Hurley, the kid who's at LSU
Yeah.
and who ended up in the ICU a year ago almost a year ago at this time, year ago January, and Caleb come in because they allowed me to talk about other things that they were experiencing that's kind of a part of the quarterback experience from here on out. So, I mean, in my own way, I kind of enjoyed talking to all of them. And then there were some guys that like I spent a lot of time with that I didn't include in the book at all. And that was hard because I really enjoyed hanging out with those guys too.
Maybe some reporting on the cutting room floor that could reappear in some form or fashion, hopefully.
Yeah, American Princes. Yeah. How about that?
I won't give away too many details, but just so people understand what kind of reporter Seth
Mm-hmm.
Wickersham is. I mean, we crossed paths in a press box in the playoffs last year, and you had insane access to a coach in that game that morning. I think we were sitting down with another reporter, and you're just breaking it all down for us. You're all excited. You're just I can't believe
Oh,
what this coach told you the morning of a playoff
yeah.
game and the access he gave you. It didn't necessarily go to plays. I'm still thinking, shit. If you could write 10,000 words on this anyways the next day and everybody would
Yeah.
read it, but it never saw the light of day because in your head it was just like, all right, it didn't really fit with the outcome of this game. And I don't
Well,
know,
you
but you
never
are
know.
constantly like hurling
Yeah.
yourself in these situations that people rarely ever have access to.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I think that that's the game, right? I mean, I think that like you want to football is a sport that Americans care the most about and know the least about. And so how can you bridge that gap? And there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's a lot of people who do it at a high level, yourself included, and there's a lot of people who have done it at a high level. But I think that like for me, um, you know, I just wanted to what I've wanted. I have a collection of my stories coming out next September. And going through those stories has been an interesting process because you remember like who you were when you wrote certain things and what you were trying to accomplish and that type of thing. And um, you know, what as you like watch more football and get to know people better and learn more about it, you get to like kind of have confidence in your own thoughts. And so like the moment that the Malcolm Butler interception happened in the Super Bowl, I knew there was going to be a story there at some point, right? Because that's too big to serve. Like that. Like that's too big of a problem. Too big of um, a crushing blow. Too big of a loss
Yeah.
to just move past. And so, I was always kind of keeping my eye on the Seahawks, and then you could start to see some of the cracks forming. And then I really wanted to go in and tell people what was going on in that locker room and why that so many of the problems that team was having with Sherman and Carroll and Russell Wilson were all really tracing back to that play. And so, I think that like, when President Trump was coming after the kneelers in the fall of 17, and the owners are having all of these kind of crises meetings, that's an opportunity, right? I mean, you want to take readers inside of that and say, like, this is a rare opportunity where, right, rare moment where the owners in the league are kind of sweating. And what happened? What was said behind those closed doors? And so, me and my co-writer, sometimes Don Van Natta, we really wanted to do that. And so I think that like, and then, do things have meaning? And I think that like when I was in Denver, or in Buffalo for that playoff game, and I spent the morning with Sean Payton.
There it is. I
It's
didn't want to give it
at the
away.
well, it's okay, but in the moment, I wrote about it a little bit in the book. But in the moment, it didn't quite have what I wanted. But it doesn't mean I won't use it at some point. You know what I mean? I think that like you're just trying to kind of like at some point, you amass material and it's good to be able to kind of like have a bunch of reporting that you can activate when all of these things come into play where it's like the perfect moment, the newsworthiness, something that makes it feel urgent. I think that like when you're in our business and you're writing kind of long stories, especially now when attention is so it's so precious. um you have to have an urgency to your
Yeah.
story that makes people want to drop what they're doing and read it right then. And so, that's, I think that like that's kind of, for whatever reason, that's, unfortunately ESPN supports it, but like, that's my kind of rambling philosophy about it all.
It's dead on. I mean, you just never know what one beer at the combine is going to lead to, too, right? It's a relationship business. You just have to try to, which is tough when we start having kids and life kind of takes over.
Mm.
But you have to like put yourself in as many situations as possible, meet as many coaches, scouts, players as possible, because you never really know what one conversation is going to lead to. And I've tried to get in the habit. I'm sure you do this all the time. Just calling people, texting people without really a purpose, right? Like you don't want to just call for a quote. Like it's good to have
Yeah.
conversations, not interviews. And treat people as human
Well,
beings, not sources.
I think you definitely need interviews, but I do think that there's something to be said for I do think that like, it's like being a reporter is it's an odd, thing. You know what I mean? You're constantly butting your nose into things that aren't your business. And then not only that, butting your nose in it, but working off competing versions of the truth to try to settle on an indisputable one and all of these things. And then there becomes a point where, you almost seem to have a better concept of what might have happened than a lot of the people who lived it, which is a really weird thing. Um, and so I think that you have to interview people, obviously. Like, there's a place for conversations, but I do think that like having good interview skills is really important. And then I think that
Oh yeah.
like, you know, being a human in a very kind of weird human exchange is important. And it doesn't mean, for your listeners, it doesn't mean that you pull punches or protect certain people or whatever it might be, but I think you it means you do more than maybe is required to be fair and honest and make people feel like that even if they're mad at you or unhappy with the story that comes out, they were treated fairly and honestly.
I think that like independent thinking is getting rarer and rarer. There's definitely a lot of people in our business who might have certain relationships that kind of border on friendly, becoming friends, becoming. I'm not going to explore this dark side of the game where it does
Mm,
pay to just parachute into various situations with a clear mind without
it maybe I think that
any
like
strings attached.
yeah, I mean I think that like your stories are a reflection. I'd hope so. I think are a reflection of your curiosities, and so
Yeah.
sometimes those curiosities are, I wonder how Sean McVay is spending the offseason after getting everything that he thought that he wanted when he won a Super Bowl, and then it turns out, he's having a crisis of self, um, or sometimes like uh, I'm trying to think, the Seahawks story or a Patriot story I did in 2018 when they were all fighting, whatever it is, you're like taking things that you've learned and, you know, their existence is newsworthy. And so you're just trying to learn as much as you can about it. I think that like those are the generally the types of stories that end up coming out. But like, you know, you're always trying to be fair and accurate. Objectivity is always kind of a weird thing in journalism. Like if you watch a game, um, I'm trying to think of an example, but if you take last year's Super Bowl, um, and you read 10 stories that were written off of the game, you might read 10 different beginnings to those stories because each writer saw something else. The Malcolm Butler type of interceptions. That's everyone knows where you're going with there, but like that's the play of the game. But like, everyone watches the same game and they come away with different takeaways. And that to me is like the really kind of fascinating thing. And that's why, you know, if I were, if you and I were both doing stories on the Cleveland Browns when I did the story that you mentioned earlier, there's a decent chance you would have had a completely different type of story than the one that I had because, you know, your questions reflect your curiosities, which might lead you to different information that I was getting.
Was that the one with the double penetration that kind of went crazy?
Yeah. No, I have it right here.
There it is. Hashtag DP.
Yeah,
Oh
that
my
was a
God.
mistake on the internal marketing department.
Hey, well, you live and you learn. What can you do? But you know what I probably admire about you more than anything, Seth, and it's something I've tried to pursue in my own reporting and publishing of stories. It's being unafraid to like report something controversial in real time, something
Mm,
uncomfortable in real time. Your Seahawks story. Like, yeah,
hmm.
today we see Richard Sherman on Amazon ripping Russell
Yeah,
Wilson to shreds. It's
yeah,
obvious
yeah.
that relationship was a little strained when they were teammates. When you dropped that, you knew
Yeah,
that the reaction was
he called me a clickbait writer.
yeah,
Well, and it was never just like, hey, they don't like each other. It was that like Sherman didn't think Russell deserved to be treated like Aaron Rodgers. You know what I mean? And then Carroll was coaching Russell in a way that, you know, other players thought everyone else is getting criticized except the quarterback. And here we are, you know, tying games 6-6. Like, what are we doing here? And he's getting this huge contract like that, and he was the face of the team. And so I think
that
that
was a
it was like
great
all
game,
of
by the
those
way. Was that the
things.
Cardinals 6-6? Sorry to
I
interrupt you.
think so. And
Yeah.
Sherman was an absolute warrior in that game. Yeah, I mean, again, it's like you don't want to write about people not getting along because they're not getting along. That's not the point. Like everyone always said, like, oh, Seth wrote this story about tension within the Patriots. I never even used the word tension in that story. You know what I mean? I was trying to explain the forces that they had been immune to for most of their dynastic run that were finally coming to a head. And it was kind of remarkable that they hadn't come to a head earlier. So you don't want to just write about people fighting for the sake of that. There has to
Right.
be a
Right.
stake. There has to be a reason. Like, what's the if it could be Tom Brady not wanting to come back to the Patriots, which he's since talked about. Um, it could be, the fact that the Seahawks were never again what they were, and that that played out. Whatever it is, even with the Brown story, it was that they were going to screw up Baker Mayfield, and they did, and
Yeah.
because they were so
Yeah.
unstable, you know what I mean. And here Baker is an MVP candidate, and the Browns, couldn't make it work with him, and so I think that's the point, and I think that like again, I'm lucky in my life. I have friends like you and other people. I have a lot of friends in my life. I don't need to be friends with athletes. You know what I mean? Like, I need to try to tell the truth, or owners or whatever. I need to
Yeah.
try to tell the best obtainable version of the truth about what's going on in this league that, again, people care about so much and know so little about.
And when you talk to a million people, like what was like the final source count for your Patriots coverage when that dropped for that story?
I don't know. It wasn't high because there wasn't a ton
Okay.
of people who knew about it. You know what I mean? I think that like what that story was more. There was two controversial stories I did on the Patriots. One was with Van Natta in 2015, in which we showed that Deflategate was a makeup call for Spygate and all of the cheating that went on there. And so that was kind of a culmination of relationships on the coaching side that I had built over the course of my career, which reflected the Patriots you know, rise and dynasty. And then the second one was kind of the culmination of relationships that I had built, um, that were maybe more, well, there's some, it was everywhere, but it was kind of like, again, those are like stories that you hope, again, it's like these relationships that you've built. And when things are going great, it's easy to text them and say, hey, how's everything going? And then, when things are rocky, you're like, we need to talk, and so I don't remember how many people I talked to, that story, the genesis of it started in training camp, in the story you're referring to about the Patriots training camp 17, because um I was around the team a little bit, and I was getting the sense that things just weren't right.
Hmm.
And it was so weird. I mean, they had just beaten the Falcons in that great comeback, and they had won 5 Super Bowls, and they'd beaten Nolan Bradshaw, and things shouldn't have been better, and and yet it just wasn't right. You saw Tom for the first time really venturing out on his own with his TB12 business, and you had some contract fights. You had Jimmy Garoppolo back there, and Bill was very invested in him. You just had a bunch of forces of ego and credit and all of these very human things that they had managed to stave off until then. And so I kind of was just doing reporting along the way. And then, really it was kind of a month maybe or so before that story came out that I was like, I really want to like drill in on this and see if there's a bigger story there, because I was just getting the sense that like, you know, Tom didn't want to be back, or one of those, either Tom or Belichick. And Gary Myers had some reporting about Belichick looking at other jobs, or at least calling owners. But like, it just had a sense that like one of those two might come to a head between them, and it did.
Curiosity, again, like having your own personal radar up that is going to like shine so brightly that it will glow through the Twitter BS, right? Like so many talking points and just nonsense. It just becomes accepted on social media and
Mm-hmm.
it's fed by the teams themselves, right? Press conferences, talking points, everything is just kind of moving one steady direction. So I guess my point is like when you, regardless of how many people you talk to for these stories, and when you have that conviction, when you've got these relationships, when you
Uh-huh.
know something to be true, you can write with conviction and confidence and know, okay, this might piss off some people, but I know the truth. I know what went down,
Yeah.
and I can stand by it. Which that's rare because I think there are some really good people who cover football. I don't want to shit on everybody. We both know a ton of people that cover this sport objectively and fearlessly, and it's always great having these conversations with them. But I don't know, like I think there is this movement to just kind of go along with what social media is putting out, and that curiosity isn't there, that conviction isn't there, and there's a lane for that coverage.
Well, I think that you not only need the conviction, but you also, and this is where ESPN is great, is that nobody was like, "Hey, when are you going to get your Patriot story in?" Like, if I didn't, at the end of the day, feel like that there was something worth writing, no one was going to say, "Hey, you didn't do it," and
Right.
it's going to reflect poorly on you from a performance standpoint. I think that like when you're chasing these kind of enterprisey stories, investigative stories, you really have to. Sometimes they're not efficient at all, and um, there's a lot of things that never make it into the story that you were 80% of the way there on that you just couldn't include. And, the world will never know what they are unless something happens that,
Yeah.
all of a sudden you get them confirmed. But like, it's kind of how things go. I think that like, that's the biggest misconception is I think people think you do these stories, it's all for clicks and, you you just put it out there regardless. And like that's
Right. Right.
never in my life. So I've been at ESPN for 25 years. Never has any sentence or story been impacted for non-journalistic reasons, despite our business relationships. And then B, never has an editor said, this story didn't get engagement like we hoped, and that you didn't do a great job on it or whatever that is. I mean, that's never ever ever been the case. Never has someone said that. And um you know the point of a story, you want it read. You know what I mean? That's you, of course you want to be read. I mean, that's why you do this stuff. But never are we kind of judged by you know, numbers that I think are really kind of unfair because you never know what could happen. Like, um, you could, me and Don Van Natta could work forever on a Dan Snyder story about how he's gathering dirt on Roger Goodell and other owners to keep him as a means of, keeping the team, as leverage. And, if some news breaks that day, it could knock our story, pretty far down the list
Yeah.
if breaking news is big enough. And so like I've always really appreciated that they don't judge us that way. And I think that like most people think that they think that you're out, that you personally benefit from clicks. I that's never been the case with me.
Amen.
Hmm.
I could talk to you forever, but before we run out of time here, because you probably got people to talk to, places to be. We didn't even brought up Caleb Williams. How did you get in
Yeah.
that inner circle, and what did you learn about
Well,
Caleb?
yeah. So I I visited with I when did I first meet with Caleb? I didn't spend a ton of time with Caleb, which is kind of funny, but I was around a lot. I think it was the spring after he had won the Heisman Trophy. We were in New York City. And then, I thought, and I, again, I was like I was stress testing characters, you know what I mean? So, like, I kind of visited with him and I asked him about a bunch of different things. I just kind of wanted to know what he was like. And, at the time, I think I had thought about writing about him as the first professional amateur college player. And then when I visited with his dad, and it was right after they had played Colorado, his last season at USC, and everything was about the draft and about trying to find have some agency over his employer. And so then I was like, all right, I'm gonna see where this goes. And then so I kind of kept on tabs on things. I was around a little bit during the draft process, his pro day, down in Jacksonville where he would train with guys. And I thought that, like, I didn't blame Carl Williams and Caleb Williams for being nervous about the situation in Chicago. And um, you know, there that first his first year ended up being basically a fulfillment of every premonition that they had, where the coaching staff, neither the offensive coordinator nor the head coach made it through the year. And so um, the lesson that I was trying to draw from that was that context matters, and that where a quarterback plays, even though we don't want to admit it, has some huge influence over how good of a pro they are. And so that was my point with Caleb Williams. And when the news came out about him, and I made my rounds talking about him, I was thrilled that it helped you produce a really great piece of work.
It was, I think I wrote it in the story. Like I had talked to some of these coaches before,
Yeah,
and I like what you guys did at ESPN. So it wasn't, everybody said it was an excerpt. It was a news story, like
yeah, it was a
with
news
stuff
story.
drawn from your
Yeah.
book. So I had talked to a few of them, and there was a report. I think it had come out somewhere uh on like the film stuff with Caleb, and that he had no
Okay.
help. And I
Mm.
forget where it was. It might have been a podcaster. It didn't really like pop like yours did, obviously.
Hmm.
But the coaches saw it and it pissed them off. So they talked about it a little bit. And
Uh-huh.
then your
And
story
then me.
dropped, and I
Yeah.
couldn't, yeah, I couldn't shut him up. I was
That was
literally
good.
on the phone with one of them, and he's reading the story on the site and just couldn't believe it. So, I think everybody should do themselves a favor and read all Bear stuff, all Caleb stuff, whether
There
it's
you go.
American Kings or
Well,
House of
and
Dysfunction,
I
because I
and
think
I
we kind of came to the same conclusion, and that last year it was just however you slice it, it was just a heaping, steaming pile of feces. It was bad.
it was, and I think that, like, there are two sides of that story, and my entire book wasn't about his rookie year. Otherwise, I think I would have fleshed it out more. Caleb came out and said on the record, what he was getting at with the film study, and obviously some of the coaches disagreed with that. Um, but I knew a little bit more about that, than I actually ended up putting in the book. But I think that, like, the other side to it, and this is where so much of what I write about in the book comes out, is that, like, you know, the subtext of my book is that you have to be a real asshole to be like it's not a coincidence that some of the biggest assholes in the building end up being the superstar quarterback. And I was at Elite 11, that the high school quarterback showcase, and Caleb showed up. I didn't know he was going to be there, but as I was reporting the book, Caleb was at USC at the time, and one of the guys, so you got Colin Hurley out there. You got Julian Sayin, who's starting at Ohio State. the kid in Florida, I'm blanking on his name, University of Florida, he was there. There are some really good high school quarterbacks that are there. And one of the Elite 11 guys who'd been there for a while was like, look, we're just breeding little assholes. And so I showed that through people other than Caleb. I kind of touched on it a little bit that Caleb could be that way. Like I think there's a lot of people at USC who didn't miss him when he left. But that said, they haven't been nearly as relevant or nearly as good without him. And so I think that how things went south, last year between him and some of the coaches that you illuminated terrifically. Again, I don't think that to me um, was a terrific, piece. And, I'm glad that someone did it.
Okay, now it's time for the hard hitting one to end on. Why is Leroy
Okay.
Butler so much better than Steve Atwater? Can you just explain that to us, Seth?
Why did you and I get into it about this? I think I once mentioned that Steve Atwater belonged to the Hall of Fame or was congratulations. And it was like all of these like Packer Twitter people, which I'm sure that you've had your share of toasts and run-ins with over the years. Man, they are an interesting breed. I was like, what happened here? It's a very odd group. Like I remember like the Ringer once wrote about like Seahawks Twitter, and Mina Kimes was like the leader in the Macy's Day Parade of that group. And like I really think Packer Twitter is like the oddest one of all of them because they're so sensitive. But like the Patriots Twitter or Patriots ecosystem is defensive. It's a very different than the Packers Twitter is just sensitive. So anyway, I think I mentioned that Atwater deserved it, or I was glad that he got in, or whatever it was. And like little did I know, I set off everybody who was thinking that Leroy Butler should have been in there first. I mean, hell if I fucking know. I mean, I thought Leroy Butler was an outstanding player, and like when the Broncos beat the Packers in the Super Bowl, the reason they did it was because Mike Shanahan figured out a way to isolate Leroy
Yeah.
Butler and essentially make him irrelevant. And that was the key to their game plan, was like getting Leroy Butler as far away from the ball as possible. So I mean, obviously he's a phenomenal player, but like I didn't realize that I would offend so many, you know, media people by saying that I was glad that Atwater got into the Hall of Fame.
You know what? I didn't even see that. That totally went over my purview. I just know that we went at it a couple times in the past, just
We did?
more
God,
tongue
I
in cheek,
totally
tongue in cheek.
did. We? Jeez, I don't even remember. Like that's maybe I got hit in the head too much as a quarterback and I don't even remember those things. That's
This
funny.
was great, man. Seth, I can't thank you enough for hanging out. How's the tour been? And we talked a little before ding and record here, but are you
Mhm.
still talking American Kings? I mean, we see you on TV. I've caught you on a couple podcasts, but like we kind of started with, you got to have a passion, you got to have a love for the topic, and it just comes through whenever I catch you.
Thanks,
So you
man.
probably want to keep talking about it.
No, it's fun. You know what I mean? And I think that there's all kinds of different one of the when you write a magazine story, you know, you're talking about that story. And I think that like when you're talking about books, um, you know, a lot of it is the idea. And I think that like that to me is interesting because people have their own takeaways in such a more kind of profound way than they do with investigative pieces or whatever it might be. And so that to me is the fun part of doing books, is because it kind of just opens doors for for more conversation, which I think, that's cool. And it's cool that books can be at the center of that. I look forward to your next one, whenever that is.
I know. Yeah, well, I'm waiting to kind of just be swept away in inspiration like you,
Yeah,
man. Because you can't
can't
just
force
do
it.
it to do it. It can't be punch in,
Yeah.
punch out. It's got to be an obsession. But your
Yep.
passion just flows through. And it's better to be feared was phenomenal. But this
Thank
is
you.
right there, if not better, because of that passion factor. You can tell that Seth Wickersham was born to write this book. So listen to it, read it, and share it with everybody in your life. Thanks so much for hanging out with us, Seth, and thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks, brother.